Good afternoon and welcome to the third week. Sorry, I've got a little bit of an echo going on. We'll see if we can address it and then we'll start again. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Jo Mountjoy and I'm the Chief Nurse of the Trust. I'd like to welcome you to this third week of our members event. And we're focusing today on the celebration of our overseas nurses over the last 20 years. This session will cover off and introduce you to Amanda Brown, our Associate Director of Resourcing, who will cover how we recruit nurses and how we support them once they arrive. I'll also introduce you to two overseas nurses who are Umesh Chirasi and Elaine Walsh, and they're going to share their journey from India and Ireland. I'd like to remind you that we will take questions and hopefully be able to answer them towards the end of the session, but I would encourage you now to click the question icon and put your question in the chat. We will do our utmost to answer all questions. Our first cohort from overseas arrived 20 years ago, and I'm delighted to say that 80% of those amazing people still remain working in our organisation. We have 5,000 members of staff, 1,420 make up the nursing and midwifery workforce, so that's a very large proportion of our workforce. Historically, nurse training challenges have resulted in many organisations recruiting from overseas. And I recall when I qualified in 1990 as an enrolled nurse, there would be 4 cohorts a year coming out into the workforce as people qualified. Over time, the enrolled nurse post stopped and people converted their qualifications to registered nurses. And we moved to a diploma, degree, and latterly a degree-only profession. All of these had enormous effects on the ability to fill vacancies across the NHS. So 5 years ago, when I was Deputy Director of Nursing, Louise Stead asked me to lead a piece of work and revisit the recruitment to overseas, to bring in an end-to-end process to ensure that everyone was successful in gaining their nurse and midwifery PIN to allow them to be employed as a registered nurse in the UK. Our overseas recruitment took us to India, to the Philippines and across Europe. These individuals provide us with a richer, more diverse workforce who are hardworking, compassionate, caring and provide a huge benefit to our patients. In total, we have 590 overseas nurses across 41 different nationalities, but the biggest percentage is from the Philippines. Once they qualify, they're supported to complete a 1-year preceptorship, and then further to that is opportunity to train further and develop. Health Education England provide us with finances to support people who want to develop in their career, whether it be academically or technical skills. They can then go on to perform a more senior clinical role, such as a clinical nurse manager, up to a clinical nurse specialist, and even up to being a nurse consultant. Alternatively, nurses may choose to take a managerial role within the organisation, and this will be a ward manager, a matron, divisional head of nursing, and up into being a chief nurse if they choose to. I do recognise the personal commitment and sacrifice of our overseas nurses, particularly during the pandemic, and their enormous contribution, in particular the cohort that arrived within the peak and all went straight into intensive care to ensure that we had the appropriate staffing to provide the care for our patients. I'm going to show you 2 pictures now, and I was very delighted to be given the opportunity to go to India myself as Deputy Director of Nursing to do recruitment And while we were there, we were lucky enough to be able to buy our outfits that you can see on the screen. To the right, you can see me dressed as Florence Nightingale. And this was actually in the year of the International Nurse Celebrations, which actually fell at the same time as our pandemic. So just to raise morale, I put on the outfit with one of the original lamps and visited all areas. And this was the feedback I received mainly from the overseas nurses, how delighted they were to see me and how crazy I actually looked. So I'm now going to hand over to Amanda Brown, our ADO of Resourcing.
Thank you, Jo. Hello, everyone. Some of you who do know me may know me because I head up the International Resourcing Division. My colleagues, who you should be able to see on the next slide, pictured from left to right, are Emma Bevan-Kay and Helen Park, who make up the recruitment team. Whilst a large part of their job is organising the recruitment, the welcome and the deployment of international nurses, they also are responsible for organising all of the certificates of sponsorship, or COSs as they're known, for the entire trust. The COSs allow an employee to be able to apply for a visa, a working visa, to come to the UK. Now, the visa process is very complex and necessarily bureaucratic, so I'm going to move swiftly back to the topic that I'm here to discuss. The International Resourcing Team was established in 2014 when I accepted a 6-month secondment, and 7 years later, successful years later, we just welcomed our 35th cohort, which is a group of nurses to the UK, but you'll hear more about them later. As Jo mentioned, setting up the International Recruitment Team wasn't just established on a whim. It wasn't something the Trust took lightly. Due to the very large national shortage of nurses, most hospitals were struggling with large numbers of nursing vacancies that couldn't be filled with UK nurses alone. As a team, we strictly adhere to the UK Code of Practice for International Recruitment, and this aligns to the World Health Organization list of countries that we're allowed to recruit from. Now, this includes all of Europe and a select group of companies, including the Philippines and India. Next slide, please. As you can see from this slide, we're going to have a brief look at the nurse's journey from being a qualified nurse in their home country to being or becoming a registered nurse in the UK. Now, the entire process starts with the Trust appointing an experienced and knowledgeable supplier who brings local expertise to the entire process. Now, they don't only assist the Trust, they support and encourage the nurses on their journey. The flowchart that you can see is very, very much abridged and missing numerous steps. If there are any overseas nurses watching this now, they'll say it's missing at least 50 steps. But however, it does very clearly illustrate the key milestones in the nurse's journey. It's important to mention that our nurses apply via a specific advertisement, and from the moment of their application, their recruitment and selection process is exactly the same as a UK nurse, insofar as their shortlisting, interview process, skills assessments, etc. are all identical. Our supplier, Drake Medox, and the International Resourcing Team work together very closely to ensure that the process is as clear as possible and stress-free, but it's by no means an easy process. It can be very time-consuming and costly for the nurses. Without going into too much detail, the Nursing and Midwifery Council, the NMC, is the governing body, and they, amongst other things, assess that the training provided in each of the countries that we recruit from meets the relevant standard. They also require a 2-part test of competence to be completed by each of the international nurses before they're eligible to join the UK register and allowed to practice as a nurse. But let's not forget that at the heart of all of these processes are dedicated, skilled nurses who, for all sorts of individual reasons, chose to leave their home countries and join our Royal Surrey family. So let's see a few of them. Next slide, please. Okay, this photograph here you can see was taken way back in 2019. Since the pandemic, all recruitment is conducted virtually. But this photo was our second recruitment event in India. You can see 4 of our colleagues in the centre of the photograph there at the welcome meeting, preparing for a very long day of interviewing. This event generated well over 80 offers to nurses, the majority of whom are now settled and working at the Trust. Have a look at some more of our nurses. Next slide, please. Okay, skipping ahead, this photo shows the final stage of the recruitment process, which is the deployment. So here's a recent cohort arriving in the UK from the Philippines and from India. I always look forward to deployment arrivals, and I'm not embarrassed to say that I still get quite emotional about it. It's really great to finally meet the nurses and to see the really unique mix of emotions on their faces, sort of a 50-50 combination between nerves and excitement. Next slide, please. Okay, and this is the final slide from me. This is a photograph of a group of nurses from our earlier cohorts. So I think this was taken sometime between 2015 and 2017. And as you can see, they're all receiving their certificates upon completion of their training programs, becoming fully fledged, professionally registered nurses, a very proud moment for all concerned. I'd now like to introduce you to Umesh Chirasuri, Divisional Head of Nursing, who will share his journey of one of our first international nurses to join us from India.
Thank you, Amanda. Hello, my name is Umesh Chirasuri. I'm the Divisional Head of Nursing for Medicine and Access. I just came in May 2002, and we were 4 in our cohort, and we were the first cohort from India. And including 4 actually, one of them my wife, and she is currently working as a senior sister on OB ward. The reason for coming over here is definitely is the betterment of our life, both professionally and personally. And I heard about UK is a good opportunity for developing your career and professional development. The challenges we faced when we came over here, as you all know that one, migrating to a new country is a challenge for any individual. I was so anxious and worried about the migration. And we were emotionally and spiritually and culturally is an entirely different country. And worried about how you're going to cope up with the cultural barrier, language barrier, and how you're going to integrate with the